Yeah, I think it's super important and often undervalued when you're sort of being trained to be a leader because,
Hmm.
there used to be this view that you're sort of born as a raconteur, storyteller. It's not a skill. I mean, you and I both went to business school. It wasn't really a skill that was focused in on there either.
Mm-mm.
But as we all know, I mean, if you've worked for a boss or a leader who can inspire, engage, the best way to do that is through storytelling
Hmm.
and a vision. It's the best way to outline a vision. And we all know the difference between someone who uses a lot of corporate jargon to
Hmm.
talk about a vision versus someone who's able to do it via storytelling. It just comes across as much more authentic,
Hmm.
interesting, engaging. And that's because it is.
All right. Welcome to this episode of Hyphen Nation. Today, I'm here with my guest, Neela Montgomery, who's with me from Boston right now. Neela and I just saw each other here in Palo Alto recently, where Neela was here for a Logitech board meeting, and that was right before the holidays. Good to see you again, Neela. Wanted to have you on the episode because I want to share the story of someone from the UK. We don't get that many. I've only interviewed, I think, mostly Americans so far. We have a lot of listeners who've grown up abroad and have immigrated to the US, and learning about the experiences of someone who's come from abroad and worked abroad and in the US and in Asia as well. I think your experience is fascinating. But when I was looking up, I found out that the CEO of Crate and Barrel was a South Asian woman. I was like, what? I never heard of that. And then I found out you were president of CBS. And I'm like, what? So to me, it's funny because we don't see that many stories or coverage of people that are from Asia, from Asian origins in the US and in the business magazines or everywhere else because we're used to seeing kind of the same folks. So I had to have you on the podcast because I think it's always inspiring to see those who did break through those ceilings and make it. Thank you for being with us today.
No, thank you for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
Yeah, so let's go back to the UK. I always assume everyone's from London, but I don't want to assume that if they're from the UK. Could have been from Manchester or somewhere else. But would love to hear about your childhood growing up in the UK.
Yeah, so I am actually one of those. I grew up just outside Manchester in a place
I didn't
called
know that. I just said that.
Blackburn. And it's funny because if you were British, you would say, well, you don't sound like you grew up from in the north. But somewhere along the way, I don't think I ever had a very strong northern accent, but I certainly don't have one now. I was the daughter of two doctors. My mother was a surgeon, 1950s medical school in India, so kind of a real pioneer in Calcutta in India. And
Wow.
my father grew up in a very in a tough situation in a village and won a scholarship to go and study medicine in the city. And then they met, fell in love, had a very unusual love marriage, and came to the UK. So I had this very, I would say, pretty idyllic childhood, very strong community, as many immigrant communities are. And in my community, so many of my sort of, we call them cousins, but I guess it's the sort of peer group of the
Hmm.
second generation that we grew up with, thinking we were
Yep.
family, went on to be doctors, or if you couldn't get into medical school, you became an accountant or pharmacist or something in that line. There was this really strong emphasis, as I'm sure there are in many Asian communities here, on security, professional qualifications, having a career that you could count on.
And so, did your parents make you feel that way? Because you majored in English literature, so I'm surprised
Yeah,
you didn't have to
no,
do.
my parents, yeah, exactly. I was considered like a little bit of a rebel because
Yeah,
it was like, how could you go and do something as wild as English literature?
yeah.
My parents did not. They were very kind of thoughtful around you should do what you're passionate about, and kind of really encouraged me. I think they very much wanted me to go to a kind of Ivy League school. I ended
Hmm.
up going to Oxford, but I think in terms of subject, they did not push me into medicine at any point,
Mm,
which was almost like the norm in my
yeah.
community.
Yeah. So even though they were doctors, they didn't feel like they wanted you. They didn't pressure you to go into medicine. They let you do what you want to do, and you chose English literature. Was that your first passion when you went to Oxford? Is that you started as English lit?
Yeah, so the British system is very different to the US in that you specialize much earlier. So
Yeah.
you only study four subjects between 16 and 18, and then you really select one and go very deep for 3 years. The good thing about the system is you come out early. And no, it was not my first fashion. It's funny, I was a maths major, a very unusual. I was the only girl to study advanced mathematics in my school. And it's funny, with all the focus now on STEM, you would have think someone would have said to me, "Oh, you're really good at math. You should go study STEM." But I was like, "Oh, I love reading books and I'm so passionate about Shakespeare and Jane Austen. I'm going to go study English literature." And of course, I ended up studying English literature. I think now, with the focus on getting more women into STEM, someone might have had that conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so at Oxford, I mean, were there many other Asians in English lit majors? I would imagine you had been one of few because most parents wouldn't let them.
That's true, actually. Yeah. I hadn't really thought about it, but yes, it was pretty unusual across all humanities, to be honest,
Mm,
all liberal arts. There were a number of people of certainly of Indian origin and other Asian nationalities at Oxford, but yes, they were not more focused on the sciences in those days.
there were law and medicine or other degrees that would get you an income right after school, the secure jobs.
That's right. That's right. And, but Oxford itself at the time didn't have a lot of so-called vocational degrees. I mean,
Mm,
I think when I was there, they introduced computer science. So that was sort of, that was
yeah,
still a relatively small course.
yeah.
So medicine you study kind of later on. So it was actually most people there were studying a humanities or a pure science.
Right. Growing up and going to Oxford in the UK, I mean, there's a large South Asian population in the UK. So did you ever feel, I mean, nowadays with all the immigrant like sentiment, like it's probably feels a lot different, but did you feel like you were different growing up there or going to Oxford?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. I mean, you're bilingual for one thing, you have totally different sort of home life and customs. And my parents were very strong about keeping their community together. And I very much grew up spending all my weekends in that community, which is funny because, I look at my kids and they spend all their weekends on their school activities, for example, and it was just never assumed that your parents would sort of gear their free time to your activities. It was
Hmm.
like you would gear your
Yeah.
free time to
To their
what
activity.
they happened to be
Yeah.
doing. And a lot of that
That's true.
revolved around eating and gathering and religious ceremonies and
Yeah.
cultural events. And so I think it was a very rich experience, but it was definitely different to that of my more traditional English friends.
Mhm. And did you have siblings?
I did. I have a brother who's 12 years older than me.
Okay, so he was like, I mean, he already gone through the whole process. So did that open up more options for you to become an English major because he kind of went
It
through?
did. That
He was a
actually, I
doctor.
should have
Was he a
mentioned.
doctor?
I'm kind of editing now. That's
Yeah,
unfair, but
I was like, that was a.
he definitely paved the way because he studied history,
Oh,
and that was even more rebellious in some ways. And he didn't even go to Oxford, so
yeah.
it
Oh,
was
so they're just happy. Your parents are
it
just
was
happy.
wild.
Yeah. Wow. History major and English major. That's unheard of. No. so after Oxford, I think you shared that you with me that you went to ad agency. Is that correct?
That's right.
How did you end up there versus going to get a PhD or a master's or some other degree?
Yeah, well, it's funny. This is where my parents' bias did
Yeah.
creep in, that they were like, well, why would you go and work? Like, go and study something else and go and get a
More
master's or
degrees.
yeah. And I was very keen to sort of be in the workplace and understand what it meant. I wanted to live in London. I wanted to be financially independent. I had a big drive towards that. With an English degree, I initially thought, well, I could be a speech writer, a political speech writer. And I sort of tried some of that. And then I thought, well, I could use this sort of in the communication and industry. And so either PR, marketing, advertising. And so I went to Young and Rubicam, which was a pretty well known at the
Hmm.
time, New York company, but very, very global,
Hmm.
and had the privilege of working on a number of sort of large global accounts. It was during the first .com boom. And so it was a fun time to be in marketing, big budgets, new
Yeah.
companies, lots going on. Very exciting.
Did you feel like that your English, so because one of the things I always talk about is that like storytelling is so important, and as an English literature major, you really understand that, and you understand kind of how it works, what's effective, and what's not. Do you feel like that kind of background in English lit and in advertising helped you throughout your career in terms of becoming a good storyteller?
Yes, I think it definitely has helped me. And there's a number of ways in which I would say that one is obviously just your personal ability to tell stories and sort of engage audiences and sort of think about that. And, it's funny, I've at different points in my career had people support me on communication, and it's a tough job because I like to write speeches. I like that whole kind of thinking about structured communication. But I think also in the industries I worked in terms of consumer and brand and how you create connection, emotional connection, a lot of that is storytelling as well, and sort of thinking through empathy and how people identify with brand and how you kind of reach them emotionally.
And as a leader, as you've led companies, how do you feel that like kind of superpower of storytelling has helped you lead?
Yeah, I think it's super important and often undervalued when you're sort of being trained to be a leader because,
Hmm.
there used to be this view that, oh, you're sort of born as a raconteur, storyteller. It's not a skill. I mean, you and I both went to business school. It wasn't really a skill that was focused in on there either.
Mm-mm.
But as we all know, I mean, if you've worked for a boss or a leader who can inspire, engage, the best way to do that is through storytelling
Hmm.
and a vision. It's the best way to outline a vision. And we all know the difference between someone who uses a lot of corporate jargon to
Hmm.
talk about a vision versus someone who's able to do it via storytelling. It just comes across as much more authentic,
Hmm.
interesting, engaging. And that's because it is.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's so true, and I talk about it a lot, and how a lot of us in Asian cultures, we're so focused on being heads down and doing the work and meritocracy that that's what's going to get us recognized. But I'm like, well, the storytelling on a to a larger group or to an individual is what builds relationships and builds trust and how you actually connect with people, and that's actually, I think, what helps you level up in the workplace. It's not doing the Excel spreadsheets is one thing, but now AI is going to do that, so that's not going to help you much. But if you can't connect with people on a human level, on an authentic level, you can't really build those relationships that'll help you kind of move up the ladder. And I think that's a super critical skill to have. And it's ironic that we both went to business school and that wasn't a focus, because I think that should be the probably the number one focus for a lot of these schools.
Yeah, and I think, at business school, there seems to be this view that, and I think in life generally, that storytellers are charismatic, right? It
Hmm.
comes from personality traits much
Hmm.
more so than training or, and I think obviously there's some truth to that because you have to have some inclination to want to engage an audience. But I think if you're a leader, hopefully you have that anyway.
Yeah.
But then giving people more of a thoughtful toolkit around it or more sort of techniques, I think is super important.
Yep. So after Young Rubicam, you weren't at Tesco yet. You like what was this the kind of the path to Tesco?
Yeah. So I went to business school at INSEAD, and it was interesting. Really, at the time, I was thinking about going to the Kennedy School to do
Mm.
international relations because I still had a strong interest in sort of politics and
Hmm.
global affairs. And I was a bit torn between doing an MBA and being very shallow at 26. I was like, oh, one's 1 year and one's 2 years. So I'll do the 1 year course.
And it's like France
But
and Singapore. I'm like, yeah.
yeah, and it's in France and Singapore, and it's very global. I have to say, I loved INSEAD because it was remarkable, the number of nationalities, cultures in one place, all sort of stuck together in the remote French forest. So you sort of really have to spend a lot of time with each other. And I liked that piece of the community, sort of, and
Hmm.
navigating all of those global challenges around communication, creating
Hmm.
empathy. How
Hmm.
you tell a story in Japan is very different to how you tell a story in Italy. And,
Yeah.
I remember having all nationalities in my study group and sort
Yeah.
of how to navigate that.
Yeah. I forget. I mean, I always my fondest memories of Stanford are being with all the international students, because I felt like when I was an undergrad, I just spent time with all Americans. But when I actually connected with folks from all over the world, and then when we got to travel too, we got to visit their home countries and them hosting us. I mean, it's incredible. Now anywhere I go around the world, I get to catch up with friends in Spain or India or Japan or wherever, and it's just so. I feel like we're so fortunate to have had that experience. It just kind of opens your worldview because you hear from you get to meet and hear from so many different people. And so after INSEAD is when you went back to London.
I went back to London. I didn't know what I was going to do, which was, interesting because at that point, the obvious thing to do is to take a job in consulting or
Mm-hmm.
banking or those
Mm-hmm.
things. And I knew I didn't want to do that. But I also didn't know what type of large company I would want to join. And one of my professors at INSEAD said to me, Neela, I think you'd really like retail. And I was like, no, I like media and marketing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very. And
I'm a
he was like, well,
speechwriter.
yeah. Yeah. He was like, no, I think you would really like retail because it's very customer focused and it's a fast paced industry. And as a relatively young person, you get a lot of responsibility very early in
Mm-hmm.
your career.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll become a much better leader if you go to an industry like that than if you sort of end up going to other industries which
Mm.
are less sort of focused on developing people and talent.
Why do you think that is? I mean, is it because because I felt like when I joined Yahoo as a young product manager, I had like a mini fiefdom of, I did on Yahoo Finance, I was responsible for like personal finance products. And so when you have like, you're given a product and you can run with it, but in department or one section, and then you get to be like the mini CEO of that. Is it the same in retail? Is that why you feel like you can actually own something is why you learn the most in retail?
Yeah, and I do think that if you have the privilege of working for a well-run company, where the foundations of how the company functions are strong, they're able to give young people and young executives more and more kind of scope
Hmm.
because they can take more risk. It's kind of ironic in a way.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I've discovered. They can be very thoughtful about developing people and talent because they need so much of it. I think there's
Yeah.
also that, right?
Yeah.
But then I think the second piece is, they've got the environment in which they can give you more scope and responsibility. And then I think the third is they have a sort of large scale number of associates. So you really have to value leadership
Yeah.
in that context.
And so what area did you start off in?
So I started off in strategy and sort of as a internal consultant type to the board. And I guess these days you'd call it like a chief of staff
Mm.
role. And it was funny because I was quite suited to the strategy piece of that and the fast paced nature of it. I was not well suited to the sort of service piece of it. So being a chief of staff who had to organize other people.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and it's been interesting for me later in my career to have a chief of staff
Yeah.
and to sort of think about it's a great role. You get an amazing vantage point of so many issues. You learn the business so well, but it takes a certain type of person to be able to do it for a long period of time.
So what kind of person does it take? Because I feel like there's a lot of folks I know who, when they move from consulting or banking into industry, there aren't that many specific roles, especially for consulting, to go into. And the first thing they think of is, oh, I want to go into for the young folks I talk to, is like, I was thinking about going into a chief of staff role. But I'm like, there aren't that many chief of staff roles out there because there's usually just one chief of staff for the CEO, and maybe some other roles, C-suite roles have a chief of staff. But like, can you kind of elaborate on what it takes to be a good chief of staff, or what people, they might think it's sexy or certain things, but it's not all that. I mean, can you kind of share or elaborate on what your experience was and what you did and didn't like about it?
Well, I should caveat that I don't think I was a very good chief of
Oh,
staff
okay. Yeah. No,
when
that's
I
fine.
started.
And that's fine.
But
Yes.
but I can say what I now look
Yeah.
for
Why?
in
Yeah.
people. Yeah. Is I think it's people who can really sort of there's two types. There's this type that can sort of deputize for their boss, right? That they can really triage issues. They can see the whole chessboard and decide which
Yeah.
pieces are important for their boss.
Yeah.
You do need to have a level of like strategic vision and political savvy to do that
Yeah.
part. I think where it's interesting and the part that I wasn't as good at is I then wanted to make the decision. But of course, you're just
Proxy. Yeah.
serving up the decision to others
Yeah.
and you have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
But you learn a lot from doing that too and observing close hand how other
Yeah.
people make decisions.
Yeah. So not being able to actually make the decisions was very frustrating because You really wanted to do that, but eventually
Yeah.
you did. And so but you lasted. I mean, I feel like a lot of folks in our generation, like they hopped around jobs quite a bit. You were at Tesco for 12 years, 11 years and 11 months, was it? Close to
Yeah,
12
12
years.
years. It was actually 12,
It was
exactly.
12 years, yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is what's so interesting, again, maybe coming back to retail and how they manage people's careers. I think during those 12 years, I had 10 jobs or 8
Yeah.
jobs, 9 jobs. So
And lived in different places too, yeah.
lived in different countries, different places, did so many different things. And so I was very sort of lucky in retrospect to be moved and pushed and given more and more responsibility with every role. And, I do think large companies are good at that, but you also have to put your hand up to say, yeah, I will move abroad and I will do these things and I will go and work in an area that's very unfamiliar to me. And I think that always involves some kind of risk, as long as you say, well, I think I'm going to learn a lot from doing it.
So talk more about that because you said you have to speak up or raise your hand to say that you're willing to do that. Is that something that you proactively had to ask for? Because I think some people think they'll ask me. Like I feel like a lot of Asian Americans, they assume that things will be not things that things will be given to them necessarily, but that if they work hard enough, they'll be acknowledged and recognized. Because we're in school, you do well and you get, a scholarship or you get an award or this or that. And like, okay, like I just have to keep working and then someone will see my work. But that doesn't in the corporate world, that doesn't happen. I think you like you said, you have to raise your hand. But how did that like kind of talk about how that happens so more people understand what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, I was lucky to be in a role that was quite visible when I entered the organization. So, to some degree, you get known, but you also get pigeonholed, right? Oh,
Hmm.
that's Neela. She's clever. She can do strategy work,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You actually like deliver a P&L or
Yeah.
so I would give people some pretty practical advice here, which is you want to get to P&L ownership as quickly as you can, right? You want to have cross-functional experience. And I was very clear on that. I was like, I don't want to be like narrow and deep.
Hmm.
I always joke, I'm like, I want to be short and fat, not tall and thin. That happens to be true. So that was good. But so cross-functional experience, having enough depth in things, but being able to move. And then the third for me was global experience. So more than one market, understanding the global consumer. And that just makes you not only a better executive, but a more interesting person, right? If
Hmm.
you've lived much more. So I think those were the things that I knew I wanted. And I sort of was relatively thoughtful, therefore, about how I put my hand up for opportunities, how I sort of understood what was happening. And look, I was lucky in that there were senior mentors and sponsors
Hmm.
who took an interest in helping me do that.
Yeah, and I think that's underestimated how important that is, that you need those mentor sponsors in your career to actually open doors for you and champion you. I mean, I think it's funny. I did a fireside chat with Julie Kim, who's also in Boston, the next CEO of Takeda, and she said similarly that someone had asked her about why there are so many Asians in roles that are in kind of like the CFO or kind of maybe like the CTO or roles that are very specific in research, but there are very few that are kind of in the CEO roles in that path. And a lot of it was because they don't manage P&Ls. If you never manage a P&L, you just can't be considered for a CEO position because you've never managed the actual business. So I think it's important for people to realize, like, if you ever want to go down that path or you're wondering why you're stuck, it's because you said tall and thin, tall and narrow or something
Yeah,
like that?
tall and thin. Yeah.
Yes, you want to be short and fat. So, but yes, I think that's a key for a lot of folks who are kind of feeling stuck in their career. If they have been doing the same thing for a long time, probably because they've been doing the same thing for a long time, and that they have to broaden their horizons. So from Tesco, 12 years, you lived in Malaysia. I know for a fact, I know Malaysia, but where else did you
Yeah.
move around to?
It was Malaysia for 4 years. And then I worked at different points for extended periods in China and Shanghai and in Seoul in South Korea.
Oh,
So I was very lucky because that was a period of great global expansion for us. But it
yeah.
was really Malaysia that I consider sort of my leadership academy. I
Hmm.
was 30 when I went to Malaysia
Oh, wow.
and it was my first sort of executive committee role where I was really leading a business. And, by Tesco standards, it was quite a small business, probably 1 billion in revenue and 7,000 employees. But again, for me, it was such an amazing opportunity to, build a team, be part of an executive committee, grow a business away from the mothership without all
Yeah.
the. And again, I think sometimes those opportunities, you compare them and you say, oh, but it's relatively small and I could stay here and I could manage, the vegetable category or
Mhm.
whatever. And that's
Mhm.
much bigger than $1 billion. But actually, if you trade off where are you going to get the most learning, there's no
Mhm.
comparison.
Yeah. Did you feel like so I mean, I imagine the demographics of the leadership in the mothership were very different than in Malaysia. Did
They
you
were.
feel much more comfortable in working in Asia or in Malaysia versus back at the mothership?
Yeah, I mean, it was very different. And it's funny, sometimes when people ask me, especially those that sort of don't know as much about Malaysia, they say, oh, where's the most diverse place you've ever worked?
Yeah.
And it's Malaysia by
Yeah,
far.
for sure.
And our executive team there was, Malay, Chinese,
Yep.
Indian,
Indian, everyone. Yeah.
everything. And then I compare that to Germany, where I went to work later in my career, very much the opposite. So,
Yeah.
yet people have this impression that Malaysia's a Muslim country and
Yeah.
Germany's this very liberal country, but actually the work environment, that isn't simply not
It's
true.
totally different.
And one other thing I would say about Malaysia that was very interesting is so many women in the workforce. And partially there was a couple of reasons for that, partially because of this thing in Asia where the grandparents raise the children. So you get a lot of parental
Yes,
support.
childcare. Yeah.
Yeah. And the availability of childcare. So
Yeah.
you could pretty much assume that one of your female team members was going to come back and they were
Yeah.
going to continue to rise in their career.
Interesting. And did you feel like in the UK, like you had to code switch more than your home culture, like, family life and then going to work? And then in Malaysia, I'd imagine maybe less of that because your peers were look more like you or kind of had
Yeah.
same backgrounds?
Yeah, I think that's a very insightful observation. And I think that was true. I don't know that I was aware of it as much at the time. And then the
Mhm.
other thing I would say that I really observed, which I try to think about now as a leader, is I had both my babies when I was in Malaysia and I had them
Mhm.
very close together within 13 months. And, I could tell that everybody back at the mothership was, waiting to see would I be the same executive after I had these two children in quick
Mhm.
succession, and was I going to be the same person? And one thing about Malaysia and Asia generally is you were really able to integrate your family and your
Mhm.
work life much more. Like my
Mhm.
babies would come to the office, like my husband would bring them to the office at 5, be lovely, and everyone would see them. And
Oh,
that's not super
yeah,
abnormal there.
no.
It's pretty unusual in the UK or the
Yeah.
US.
Yeah.
So I think this ability to sort of merge your home life and your work life and blend them more is something we could all learn from those
Mhm.
cultures. I think they
Yeah.
do that better. I think there's less judgment. I think
Yep.
there's much more sort of integration.
Yeah, because you have generational families living together, and it's just it's very communal in Asia, and then in the West, it's a lot more individualistic. So you do your things on your own. Did you like? How did you feel like you were able to navigate the mothership? Being that I'd imagine the executive committee wasn't that diverse at Tesco.
No, it wasn't. No. And I think I was sort of lucky in that I had somewhat grown up there. So I knew those people,
Sure.
but I was always able to be pretty much myself. I mean,
Mm.
one thing I'm lucky in, well, I don't know if I'm always lucky, but I'm pretty authentic. And the good thing is, I was able to be myself and be valued for that.
Mm.
But I do think, your point about code switching is important. I think in those environments, you do have to recognize that you're different
Hmm.
and think about how are you navigating some of those differences. I probably, looking back now, being a bit older, was naive about some of that. I didn't necessarily understand all those dynamics. So
Sure.
I just kind of very much myself.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe not the advice I would give to everyone.
Yeah. Although sometimes being naive, you don't act differently and you're unaware, so you are more yourself, and that's what people appreciate about someone, and they become more vulnerable because you're fully yourself. But I feel like most folks I know, when they are different, they shrink and they become smaller because of that difference. Others, because they know they're different, they embrace that and they're like, oh, I'm going to use this to my advantage. I'm the only woman in this room, so they need my opinion, because anytime anything comes up that's not about a man's opinion, then I mean they need to hear from me, or if you're, a minority or someone who's more diverse, I think if you're the only one in the room, that means your opinion should count for more too, because you're the only one who understands that demographic. And especially with Tesco growing the market in Asia and other places, they had to listen because you knew better than they did, even though many of them probably assumed that they knew more than you did. I think that's sometimes people see it as a negative, but if you can embrace it and reframe it as being like a superpower or a positive, I think it can change how you behave in those rooms.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think certainly feeling like you have something important to say and something meaningful. But I didn't really struggle with that piece.
Yeah.
I was very clear on that. But I do think the piece that, with age, I perhaps realized is you do need to understand the political and organizational context in which you are operating.
Yeah.
And I think I had very little respect for that earlier in my career. And as time has gone on, and maybe as I've got senior and more sort of whether wiser or more jaded, I've realized that the context does matter. And
Hmm.
so learning that sort of mid career, I think is a good skill to have.
But do you think that by not knowing those kind of unwritten rules or boundaries, that it actually was good for you because you broke some of them and you're like,
Yeah,
oh,
no.
I should know my place, but I didn't. So I just said what I wanted to say. Sometimes that can come off actually well, I would imagine.
Yeah, I was unapologetically
Yeah.
me all the way.
Yeah.
But all I'm saying is, I think, yes, that worked for me in that environment. I'm not sure it works in every
Oh, in
environment.
all environments.
Think there have been areas of my life later in my career where it didn't work. So
Yeah.
I just think at that point, I didn't understand that it could be otherwise.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, okay, understand the context
Yeah.
that
Read the
you are
room.
going to be
Yeah.
in that is going to allow you to be unapologetically yourself if that's
Yep.
what you be.
Yeah, yeah, to read the room and understand it. And I mean, you probably got some leeway at Tesco because you've been there for 12 years, so you had earned the right to or were comfortable with the folks in the room. Okay, so you've been at Tesco, your family forever. I don't know, I guess in our world, it's forever, 12 years. But then you left to join Otto in 2014.
Yeah.
What was that like having been at a place for so long and then deciding to leave? Like, was there a clean break? Why you like, were you moving back from Malaysia and you're like, oh, I want to try something new? Or what was the timing of all this?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where when you've been in a company so long or you've kind of grown up there, you sort of start to wonder, can I be successful in a different environment? And
Hmm.
so, despite my real affection, loyalty, respect for Tesco, it had changed a lot. My mentor sponsor had become the CEO, but there was increasingly sort of changes in the culture. And I thought, I think it's time for me to try something different.
Hmm.
I didn't think it was gonna be as different as the Otto Group, which
Hmm.
was a privately held German family-owned business.
Yeah.
But I think you always have this view, like, should I not sort of take my skill set and apply it in a different environment? And it was intriguing. And to be honest, initially I wasn't that interested. But then when I went and met Michael Otto, who is an incredible German environmentalist, entrepreneur, billionaire, I thought, wow, there's just a very different way to
Mm.
manage a company and he thinks about it in real like people say they have long-term thinking and then you meet some of these family owners and they have generational
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah.
The difference of going between quarters and generations was
Yeah.
quite extreme.
Yeah.
And then also he had certain brands that I really liked and felt I could add value to, like Crate
Yeah.
and Barrel.
And so, like, yeah, I mean, going from a public company thinking quarterly to a privately owned where you can actually think generationally, I mean, you get to lead differently as well because you're not, going like quarter to quarter to appease kind of the public markets. How long? So you were overseeing the portfolio of Sports Check, Franconia, and Manufactum. That during that time you were overlooking Crate and Barrel was one of the portfolio companies you were.
It was, yeah. So I was
Got
spending
it.
a lot of time in Chicago at the time because we were doing a sort of turnaround of Crate and Barrel and sort of learning to be in Germany, trying to learn the language and kind of understand the culture. But I will say one thing about that particular culture and that particular family is it was very values led as a business. So they were very welcoming to me, even though I was so different.
But so I didn't even know that Crate and Barrel. I mean, I'm assuming Crate and Barrel's. Well, I don't know the history of it, but I didn't even know it was owned by a German like company. Like, what is the
No, I
history of
think
that?
most people don't, to be
I had no
honest. I
idea.
think, yeah, and it had a very high profile founder who had a gentleman called Gordon Siegel and Carol Siegel, his wife, but mainly Gordon Siegel, who had been the CEO for, I can't even remember, 30 years. So most people thought he owned the business. But in
Yeah.
fact, the German family and Michael Otto had purchased the business back in I think it was the 80s or 90s. So they
Really?
had owned it for a very long
For that
period of time.
long?
Yeah, but he had run it, and it was only sort of when he stepped down and then his number two stepped down that the German parent company really
Took
needed
over.
to, well, really needs to think about who would run it.
Run it. Oh, okay. So this like the whole time he had gotten liquidity in the 80s and 90s already through this family or through Otto, and he'd just been continuing to run it as if I mean, and everyone just
Yeah.
assumed he owned it. I got it.
Yeah, and to
Got
be
it.
honest, he did an amazing job because he
Yeah.
expanded it massively. But yes,
Yeah.
he had decided relatively early on to sell.
So he was in charge of launching like CB2 and West Elm is theirs too. Is that right?
No,
No,
CB2.
CB2.
CB2 had actually been launched, I think, by his successor and had
Oh,
not
okay.
super successful when it first launched or the
Yeah.
first version of it. What was very a lovely part of that story is that that person's son is still the president of CB2 today
Oh,
and has done this incredible job of making it cool and hip and design forward and a totally
yeah.
different brand to the
Yeah.
one that was originally launched.
Very cool. And so you went to Chicago often, and you were executive chair, but then you became CEO in 2017. So did you move your family to
Yeah.
Chicago at that time then?
Yeah. So we had some unexpected events with the CEO at the time. And so I decided rather than put the business through another transition, I would step in
Mm.
and become the CEO in the US for um, the next 3 years or so. And so my family, who had just moved to Hamburg 18 months or 2 years earlier, I was like, oh, guess
Just
what? We're
kidding.
going, yeah, yeah, we're going to Chicago. And my husband was like, really? And I was like, when? And I was like, well, 3 months from now. My kids, I think, were 7 and 8 at the time, or six
Yeah.
and seven. So that was a big move and done relatively quickly, but worked out great.
So I want to talk about that because I think Julie brought this up too, because she had to move around a lot for all the pharmaceutical companies, for Takeda and Baxter. But finding, as a mother who has to raise kids and move them around and make these sacrifices and these tough decisions for your kids that are hard on the mom, I mean, obviously it's very important, but how important was it to find a partner who was supportive and willing to, and what does that look like? And because you don't know that, I mean, I guess you might know that when you fell in love, but it doesn't always turn out that way. Like, how do you navigate a relationship like that?
Yeah, no, I often say when I'm asked what was the most important factor in your career, and it was like choosing who to marry
Yeah.
well. That's my
Yeah.
number one piece of advice because, without my husband, it would have been incredibly difficult to do what I've done. He very much took the lead role with raising our children. He also had the flexibility to live in all those different countries and to some degree put his career on the back burner. I think this is a real topic for dual career couples.
Hmm.
And I think what you often have to think about is sort of who's going to take the lead for a while and then is the other person going to be able to take the lead. And I think when you're in your 20s and you're trying to figure all that out, that can seem very daunting
Hmm.
because you sort of think, well, I have to plan it.
Yeah.
I have to sort of foresee all of these things. We
Yeah.
have to have all these conversations. I think the reality is you're probably going to have a fraction of the conversations up
Yeah.
front,
Yeah.
and most of them are going to happen in real time.
Yeah.
But you have to know that at least you have the core similarity of like, do you both have a spirit of adventure? Are you both committed to raising good humans together?
Yep.
And then how that looks and what shape it takes and who trades off when, those are all going to be things you're going to manage in
Real time.
live.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think that's the thing. Is like you don't know about these decisions until you have to make them, and then when you're in the fire, that's when you actually realize who you married and what happened. But I think it's important, like you said early on, to the sense of adventure, the willingness to, and I think you probably can tell if someone is too stubborn to even flex on where you're going for vacation. They're probably not going to be willing to move
Yeah.
themselves from their jobs and stuff
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
your career. So
And I
no,
also think there's an important piece here about parenting because, and I think this is a good one to sort of talk about, which is
yeah,
Children are the most resilient of all creatures, right? Like they are able to navigate and adapt. And yet, so many parents sort of assume that they can't or they won't, or but actually, you're giving your kids a good experience
Hmm.
by allowing them to change and learn and adapt.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I sort of think, do you have a view that you're going to keep your children in like very stable
Safe.
circumstances
Yeah.
all the time? Or is the
Yeah.
stability your relationship and your
Yeah.
so I do think that's worth discussing up front because it's almost like a fundamental tenet of parenting.
Yeah, I think I mean a lot of folks are afraid that they're gonna the parent guilt of, oh, I'm gonna traumatize my child by moving them, and they're gonna be totally messed up when they grow up because I moved them around so much. I mean, I feel like the dip kids or diplomat kids and army kids that I know that have grown up moving around a lot are able to adapt. I was like, oh my gosh, your childhood must have been horrible because you had to make new friends every like 2 years or 3 years, but they're able to adapt to environments and not and they're really resilient as adults because they're not broken by the, oh, I'm paralyzed by I don't know what to do in this new situation. But they're like, oh no, I've been dealing with this since I was a kid. Like, this is no big deal. This is like easy compared to what I had to go through. Going to a new middle school, I mean, that's the worst thing you could possibly think of as a kid. But as an adult, I mean, they're able to navigate situations because of that. So I think you make them better able to adapt and persevere in situations when they're older.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I hope so because
I
that's
know
that's
you
my
say that
thesis.
because you did it.
So my
It's
kids,
true. I think it's true.
it'd be interesting what they would say about it at 16 and 17. But they definitely had a childhood that was imbued with lots of different experiences that
Yeah,
I think make them more interesting now.
100%.
It comes with some trade-offs for sure. And
Yeah,
so I just think that's always the thing you're trying to navigate and decide.
yeah. So now you're in Chicago. You help turn around Creighton, like you're turning Creighton Barrow around. You find a new CEO to take over
Yeah.
after you're done. So you've almost become. It's funny because you've now become like a turnaround specialist as in some ways because you manage these portfolios of brands, and you're seeing what needs help. And that's when you leave. Oh, actually, before that, you joined the board of Logitech the same time you took on the CEO role at Crane Barrel. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Was it the first public company board you joined, or were you part of one before that?
No, it was the first public company board I joined. I was 39, maybe 40. So
Yeah.
relatively young, I think, at the time. It was interesting. At the time, I was looking at a number of boards, and I particularly liked the CEO at Logitech. I really liked the other board members. And I love this sort of blend of Logitech is European and American. It's
Mm.
listed in Switzerland and Palo Alto in the
Mhm.
US.
Yes.
So I liked that kind of
Yeah.
truly, truly global nature of that business and the culture within it.
So how I haven't had an episodes about board directorship, but can you explain how that process happened? It's like, did headhunters come find you, or and they came with a bunch of board seats, or was it you met someone, or like how do these things happen?
Yeah, I think
Most
in
people would
that
know.
particular instance, it came from a headhunter.
Hmm.
But at the same time, there were others that came through people I knew because it seemed obvious that I would do one board, at least in my executive career. And I really learned so much I have learned so much from sitting on a board. It's my ninth year now on the Logitech
Hmm.
board. And it's been one of the most sort of satisfying experiences I've had in my career.
So, I mean, we've talked about this before. We like your network is obviously very extensive, and you're known for all these people that you know. But what is it about network that you find is the most rewarding or valuable to you? That I think a lot of people who don't find value in networking or don't like the time spent, is like, oh, I mean, yes, the board of Logitech pays, but if it wasn't paying, like you'd probably still do it because you meet some amazing people. But I think a lot of people think like, why volunteer my time to go join the board of a symphony or join the board of Logitech or go to these conferences or speak on these panels? I think some people they don't find value in that. Like, what is it? I always tell people you should do all those things because your network is the most valuable thing you can build and invest in. What would you say about
Well, I would say, look, don't do it for its own sake, but like find the curiosity within you about those things, right? Like the board of the symphony is fascinating because you're going to learn about the role of music and culture and the city. And, and along the way, you're going to meet some amazing people and, show an interest in those people.
Mhm.
That's what networking is
Mhm.
really, right? It's showing an interest in each other. And I kind of think, well, don't expect people to be interested in you if you're not interested in them, right? Like that isn't how relationships work. And so obviously you can't do everything and you have to say no to a lot of things because you've got your family and you've got your job. But whatever you've got left in terms of curiosity, channel it into something.
And do you have an advice for those who are trying to build their network?
Volunteer, go and get
Mhm.
involved in something. Even if I think often people think, well, it's going to come to me. And,
Mhm.
maybe it will. And that's great if it does. And sometimes it does. And it's fantastic. But if not, think about what am I passionate about? How can I contribute to society? What can I do where I can learn something that takes me outside my comfort zone?
Yeah.
Look for those things because I think especially, when you're going through that period where you're just trying to like get up in the morning and get your kids to school
Yeah.
and get through your day at work, it can feel like you just don't have space. And of course,
Mhm.
there are periods where you don't have space, but don't let that period where you don't have space become your whole life.
Yes. That's right. That's right. I mean, I always tell people, it's like, say yes to people that when they want to meet. Sometimes you think, what's the point? But you never know what doors those open and kind of what connections you'll make. I mean, I reached out to you on LinkedIn, and now we're friends too. So I mean, you never know what comes from these encounters, but so many things can happen from these serendipitous kind of
Yeah.
connections. And
And
so,
one thing I've learned as I've become maybe more senior and in more of these rooms, a lot of very, very, very successful people are very good at that. Like
mhm,
they actually like to be approached or they like to have random conversations
yeah,
or be stimulated. And I think often it's other people who assume they don't, right?
right, right,
So don't
yeah.
assume,
Exactly, exactly. Because some people, I'm just like, that person would not want to hang out with me or spend time talking to me, but then they do, and it's amazing, like the connections you make as humans when you're authentically yourself and not trying to pander to them, or you need something, or you're only approaching them if you need something. Just connecting on a human level can be amazing. So the going back, you're on the board of Logitech, you Crane Barrel CEO, and then you leave to join CBS. And I'm wondering, how did that happen? Were they looking for someone to help them them around again? So they're like, "Hey, you're the turnaround queen. Let's get Neela."
They were looking for someone to lead their retail business, which is a very large business. And they were also in the process of, knowing that they would be distributing the vaccine. They had stood up testing. So it was a very, I started conversations with them. I remember it so clearly.
Yeah, what month was this?
Yeah, it was funny. I left Crate and there were so many leaving parties and beautiful
Yeah.
like leaving videos and I walked out the building and literally my phone rang. So it was like it
Wow,
was
they
a
knew.
sort of
It was like zoned.
strange,
Yeah, yeah.
weird timing. I was like, did you
Creepy.
like
Yeah, I know. Are you
you
watching me?
following
Is someone
me?
watching me? Yeah.
Yeah. And at the time I was like, oh, I'm gonna go to venture capital. I want to work with the founder. I
Oh,
want
so
to
you left not knowing what was
no,
next.
no, no. I was very
Wow.
like I know I thought that's what I was gonna do, and I
Yeah.
wanted to spend some time exploring
Yeah.
something so very different to going to run a Fortune 4 healthcare company. But I became very convinced by this idea that healthcare, particularly in the US, not being from the US, needs a level of disruption that is going to
Yes.
be customer
Yeah.
and digitally focused.
Yeah.
So I convinced myself that there were parallels to some of the retail experience. We all became better because of Amazon. Amazon
Hmm.
set the pace for retail to transform itself. And
Yeah.
I felt like, oh, well, healthcare is going to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And, perhaps a little naive. And interestingly, I think one of the things looking back is I only ever chosen two jobs virtually in my life, right? So Tesco and then Otto, which kind of came to me. And then this was like the third. And
Yep.
so, to your point, you probably get better at that over time with
Hmm.
more experience and
Yeah.
always really kind of kick the tires on these decisions, right?
Yeah, but you actually chose to go into this during the pandemic, knowing what CVS was going through. I mean, I'm sure you didn't know about all the retail crime coming your way, and Like the supply chain was probably later, but you're like, hey, I could actually help and impact healthcare, which needs to be disrupted. But you knew that going in that you'd like the vaccines would be like
Yeah.
this would be something you'd be working on.
Yeah, and certainly, look, I'm sure, unless I end up going to work for the government or something, that I will never manage anything as
Yeah.
operationally complex as the distribution of the vaccine, having 190,000 people, change of CEO and the disruption. Even things like I joined in November, and then we had the whole transition from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. We had the state by state rollout. And if you remember, it's hard to remember now, but that was a
Yeah.
very tense
Oh
thing
yeah.
between different states and access to, and up until then, most of what I knew about US politics came from the West Wing. So I was
Yeah.
like, I don't really,
Different. Yeah.
now I like know a lot more because I was in it, but
Yeah.
it was
Intense.
steep learning curve.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine getting 10,000 locations distributing the vaccine during a pandemic, and then you have to navigate all the other challenges of, I mean, because we saw on TV everything that's happening at CVS's in big cities and other things. And I was like, wow, you were dealing with a lot.
Yeah, and I think one thing that is clear in retrospect is we didn't, because we were all so concerned with safety. And do you remember we used to spend so much time talking about masks and social
Yeah.
distancing? And I think what we didn't appreciate perhaps was when we came out, when the vaccine actually got distributed in the first quarter of 21, how many other issues we were going to have to deal
Hmm.
with. That's when the labor shortages, people were like,
Yeah.
where is everybody? Why is
Yeah.
everybody not coming back to work? And
Work.
nobody,
Yeah.
and in retrospect, we should all have kind of perhaps known that. But at the time, it was like, oh my God. And then
Yeah.
the outbreaks of crime and
Yeah.
violence. And
Yeah.
then, like, just customers being so angry. And
Yeah.
I mean, this was a period, I think, of where a lot of our polarization happened as a
Happened.
country, as a society, the loss of
100%.
civility.
100%.
These were really like, and you saw that all unfold in real
Yeah.
time when in
Yeah.
our,
Yeah. I mean, the rupturing, like definitely a lot of this anger and everything was happening. But I mean, it was regardless of all the other things, the fact that you were able to manage through this process and help so many people get vaccinated, I mean, that's a huge feat. I mean, I don't know that you'll ever or many
yes.
people will ever be able to understand or experience what you had to manage through that. But if you can manage through that, you can manage through anything, I would imagine.
Thank
Because
you. I hope
it's
so.
it's unprecedented. It's like you get hit with one thing and then it's another thing and another thing. It's like, oh wow, the barrage of things that you had to deal with. I'm like, wow, only maybe Walgreens and the other pharmacies had to understand this, but it must have been crazy. And so you went through that process and then you joined. Was it right after that 24 you were joining Squarespace as actually on the board of directors. So you joined another board and then you took over at Orvion. Was it also another turnaround that they were looking?
Yes, yeah. So I left CBS in 22, and that was
Mhm.
part of them sort of changing strategy where they
Yeah.
didn't. And that was actually probably my sort of biggest career shock or disappointment.
Yeah.
But it was a great experience for me in a way because although would not have said so at the time, because it
Yeah.
really made me refocus and rethink about what matters, what
Yep.
do I want to do. And I decided actually I want to spend more time in this kind of entrepreneurial founder
Mhm.
environment. And that's when I went to be a board partner at Greycroft. That was kind of
Mhm.
the main thing I did, and really got to understand the sort of tech ecosystem. That's when I joined the board of Squarespace, another
Yep.
really interesting founder led company.
Yeah.
Very, very different to large public companies.
Logitech.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or CBS.
Yeah. So Orvian is private,
Yeah.
right?
Private
And
equity.
yep. So very different also than family run private business, public business. Like you've seen it all. A PE shop owns Laura Mercier and Bare
Yeah.
Minerals and Buxom. You joined there. What was it like? Like how is that a different experience joining a PE back company
Yeah.
versus the others?
Well,
I'm
it's
sure.
very different. Obviously, it's a different ownership. And one of the things that I like about PE, and I had worked with a couple in the intervening period,
Yeah.
is it's very clear decision making, right?
Yeah.
There's one owner typically,
Yep.
and then this was
Yep.
a so therefore, it's clear decision making and it can be very fast if
Yeah.
required. So I was able to come into a business that had had some challenges because it was a carve out. Carve outs are very complicated.
Mhm.
but you were able to sort of reset the P&L and hire a new team relatively quickly, which we know in a public company would have taken a lot longer.
Uh,
So look, there are trade-offs always. You're sort of building the company to sell it,
yeah,
which is a different set of criteria. But I
yeah,
was there very much, as you say, to do a sort of turnaround, which
yeah,
we did. But, I wasn't necessarily someone who wanted to spend my career on multi-brand beauty
yeah.
building. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's more of a situational opportunity. And so is that what's next for you? Are you looking for the next situation? You want another pandemic or a private equity turnaround or something that is impossible to navigate, but you love the
Yeah.
challenge? Like, what is next for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny. Now I'm sort of doing boards and I'm a senior advisor at Alex Partners, and I'm really enjoying that work because I
Yeah.
do feel like coaching and spending time with executive teams and perhaps joining more boards is probably where I'm going to go. I wrote a book, which I'm
Oh,
also
great.
working on, a fiction, work of fiction. So,
Ah, the English lit major comes back.
yes, finally. So maybe I'll step into another, like you say, another high
Stress job.
challenge,
Yeah.
high stress situation, or I'll love the sort of portfolio life I'm living
Yeah.
and have this sort of multidisciplinary approach to many things. One thing that I did in this period was I did something called the Henry Crown Fellowship at Aspen, which is very much about thinking about how your life moves from success to significance. And
Hmm.
so for me, not that my corporate career didn't have significance, but there are other ways I want to contribute now. So I'm on the board
Hmm.
of St. Jude's. That's very important to me. I spend a lot of time on it. uh, I want the things I do to matter and I want
Hmm.
to have a positive impact on people.
So for those are the folks listening who aspire to have that kind of that path and that career that you've had and build the portfolio that you've had. What is advice you'd give a younger version of yourself? I mean, obviously you said don't be as naive, but it's easy to say, easier said than done. But is there other advice you'd give your younger self or others who are listening who are, just coming out of business school or just getting started in their careers?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a tendency amongst all sort of type A people to think that you can control everything, that you've got to make the right choice right
Hmm.
now because that's going to lead to X, Y, and
Hmm.
Z. I think recognize that you have much less control than you think you do. And so be open and opportunistic when it matters and recognize that you can't always kind of plot everything out. But always think about what am I learning? What am
Hmm.
I learning here? And how does that sort of propel me into the next thing? And again, I think I said it earlier, be curious.
Hmm.
Always push yourself to be curious about a situation, an opportunity, a person, because it's curiosity, in my view, and talent
Yeah.
that leads to opportunity. And so what may seem tangential, and that doesn't mean like be undisciplined and just go off and do
Sure.
everything, but don't ignore the tangent.
Hmm.
And I do think particularly Asian executives were raised in a way that sometimes makes us think like everything has to lead to everything else. And
Hmm.
so we sort of somewhat underestimate the tangential or the relationship outside that can actually spark many other things. And I think take risk and know that if you fall on your face, it's going to be okay. You can get up again. And that is really like so easy to say and so hard to do.
Yeah, yeah, but it's
It's
not
like,
something we're encouraged to do, so I think it's
no,
good to hear.
no. And it's funny because it's like there's so many TED Talks on that these days, but it really hurts. It kind of sucks when you fall on
Mhm,
your face.
mhm.
But and it's some ways it's better for it to happen when you're younger, so you get
Yeah,
used to it, right?
yeah, yeah, and you become more resilient, and I think embracing the tangents, I think that's important because you never know, things happen, and if you're broken by that, then you're done, but if you embrace it, it can lead to a lot of opportunities, so but thank you so much, Neela, for this and for spending the time sharing your story, but also your insights throughout your career. It's great to hear, even though you're moving around the world, you're going to go into one career and switching to another. I think it's good to hear how that flexibility and growth mindset can open so much in one's life. And I'm hearing about how rich and well-rounded your life is now. It's serving on the board at St. Jude, Logitech. I think it's really no. I think you've written your story and you continue to write it, and literally you're writing your story. But I think it's I think it's an encouragement to so many people who feel like they have to stay on one path. Those friends of ours who had to become doctors or lawyers because their parents wanted them to, and they're staying on the same path. I don't think they have to stay on that path. I think there's a choice that we can make at a given point in time, and it might seem scary. It might not go as we expected. But it might also go as we expected if we persevere through it. And so, but hearing your stories, I think, is encouragement to all that this is all possible if you focus on being your authentic self. You learn along the way and embrace that curiosity. So thanks so much for your time, Neela.
No, thank you, Dave. I think what you're doing is super important. I think what you say about freedom and agency, I mean, ultimately, I think if I had to say what was my end game and where have I got to now, it's sort of having freedom to make the choices that I want to make and be able to do the things, not always early in your career do you have that, but hopefully that's a well-lived life and a well-lived
Hmm.
career, being able to make.
Agreed. And so hopefully I'll see you next time you're in town for the next Logitech board meeting.
Yeah. No, thank you for doing this. I think it's great. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks,
All right.
Neela. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Hyphen Nation. Please subscribe to my Substack at www.davelou.com and follow us on Instagram at the Hyphen Nation and LinkedIn at Hyphen Nation.